So I need just a little bit from you as we start, and that is, I don't know the audience, so if I can just see a couple of show of hands, how many work in a public library system? Okay, how many work in a university library system? And state library or a national library? And so who have I forgotten? School libraries? Okay, one. Any others? Special, oh, specials, okay. Well, I'm going to talk to you about public libraries today, and I will also say that one of my theories about libraries is that we don't often do as well as we should in extrapolating ideas from others and applying it to our own work. And so even though I'm talking about public libraries, hopefully you find some things if you're in another library setting that are applicable. And I think the other thing that I found in some international speaking is that we face very similar problems, but because of different cultures and different customs, we have different approaches to solving our problems. And that's where I think really the learning lies. And so I hope I can give you a few of those ideas today. But I think we better start out by saying Columbus, Ohio, where is that, right? So the US, and here we have New York, and here we have Chicago. And so we are about a 1 hour, about a 50-minute flight halfway between New York and Chicago. And this is Columbus. And I'm pointing it out. I'm going to do a wee advertisement right now because we are a finalist to host IFLA in 2016. So if we beat out those other U.S. cities who are much worse than Columbus, then I hope you will all visit and have a chance to see it yourselves as well. So we're the headquarters for many national and international brands that some of you are familiar with, limited brand. Everyone knows Victoria's Secret, but not so much in New Zealand, I understand, but certainly in Australia and others. These are all some of the companies that are headquartered. And of course, we also are the headquarters for OCLC and in Dublin, which is a suburb of Columbus. And that is the location of one of our branches. And this is our main library branch. And we were one of the few main libraries built with donated money from Andrew Carnegie. So I think he built only about 14 or 15 main libraries in the US, and we were one of them. My predecessor, who served for 50 years as a library director, think of that for a moment, right? Some days it feels like 50 years. He got on a train, unannounced, went to New York with plans, knocked on Andrew Carnegie's door. Butler came to the door. Why are you here? Told him he wanted to speak to Mr. Carnegie. He said, come back tomorrow at 1 or 2 o'clock. Andrew Carnegie saw him, rolled out the plans, convinced him to give $200,000 US to build this library. Andrew Carnegie never visited Columbus. So anytime I think I've done a lot, I think about that person and the courage it took. Of course, today, it takes more than $200,000 to clean this library, but it has been operating as a library for 107 years. So who we are, in the center of Ohio, well, first of all, there are 88 counties. That's another unit of government. So there are 88 of them, and right in the center is Franklin County, and it looks like this. And the yellow areas that you see on this map are our library district, and these are the 21 locations, the main library, and 20 branches. And then these are some independent served areas. There are 6 independent libraries in our county, so we have some great cooperation. We have a library consortium for our integrated library system. And this says 11, but actually in April it will go to 14. And so collectively we are probably getting close to circulating 27 or 28 million items, I would think. These are some of just the general statistics. We have 875 staff in Columbus and 15 million circulation, about 7.5 million user visits each year. And you can see about 3,250,000 card holders. And then computer reservations, right? People coming in and just reserving computing time. That still remains such an important service for us. And that happens 2.6 1 million times a year. So I've just given you those statistics, and yet one of my premises today is that those outputs of the past are not as important as they used to be. That's really the what of libraries, the what we do. But I think increasingly what we have to concern ourselves with is the why. Why do we exist, and for what purpose are we providing those services? So here's this made me think about the why a whole lot. We asked our Facebook friends. We have 30,000 friends of the Columbus Metropolitan Library. We invite you to join and be a friend of ours. But we asked them a few years ago to give us 5 questions, to give us 5 words that describe a public library of your youth. And we asked it specifically that way so that if you were 27 or 57 or 77, you could answer that question. And then we plotted the answers in this word cloud, and perhaps no surprise, the most frequent word on the word cloud, the most frequent response given by our Facebook friends was that libraries meant books, right? But then we asked a second question. We said, give us 5 words that describe a public library 20 years from now. What do you think the most frequent response was? Shout it out. Books. Anyone else? Other guesses?
People.
People.
Access.
Access.
Information.
Information. We had it here still, yeah.
Internet.
Internet, okay. So I think you hit it, right? Community and people, right? But stop for a moment and think about what's going on in people's mind when they think of a transformation of a library from an object that we take and consume off-site to community. And what does community mean? And how do we think about that? And how do we foster community through the work that we do in the library setting? That's some of what I want to get into today. And I've got really 3 ideas to share with you. I'm going to talk about the ebook revolution and the challenge that that's creating for us, particularly around access. But I also think it's creating a challenge for us around the scalability of services. And I have a short video that I'm going to show you to help us think about that. And then in the US, and again, I realize this may not all be applicable to a New Zealand audience, but in the US, we really have an educational crisis on our hands. And in urban settings, our schools are failing. And so I'm going to talk about that unfortunate opportunity that we have to address educational needs through the public library system. And then lastly, how do we change our value proposition? How do we move from what used to impress people when we'd say, well, circulation went up 3%, and maybe doesn't impress as much as it once did. So how do we talk about our value moving forward? And so we have this ebook challenge, and I like to talk about it as being moving from what had been the digital divide to a content divide. And 4 areas of ebooks that I think we need to concern ourselves with. So there's really a lack of competition in the aggregation business. I think here too, perhaps Overdrive is the main aggregator of that content. And when you have a situation where, and I give them all the credit in the world because they've been at this for 18 or 20 years. They built up a wonderful business, but it's almost a monopoly today. And by the way, they're headquartered in Ohio, so they're really close to us in Columbus. And I've said this to their CEO, so it's not a big problem. But what happens if this privately held company is sold to a company like Amazon? Well, that's a game changer for all of us, right? If they control all of that content. How do we think about that? And then some of those collaborations with the aggregators and the providers and the publishers, right? They're just not as seamless as we'd like them to be. They're clunky. We've got publishers who are refusing to sell or license that content to us. And then lastly, in the US, and I'm sure you face this as well, really the copyright laws are somewhat antiquated in terms of how we get access to licensed content as opposed to purchased content. And if that proposition made sense years ago, that the public should have access in the analog world, why shouldn't they continue to have access in the digital world? So we try to use tools in Columbus to try to help tell this story. And here's one that helps talk about really a success story for libraries around what had been the digital divide. 20 years ago, we had so many people who did not have access to a PC, and at least in the US, with help through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we were able to purchase many PCs, have their software, and start to provide access to the net. What we have here is, this is the map of Franklin County, and the blue dots show the location of our branches, and this one happens to be for Carl Road, which is right here. Each red dot represents the home of someone who came in to reserve a computer over a 10-week period in 2012. So remember, it's 2.2 million a year, and this graph repeats itself over and over again. You have this clustering effect around the library for proximity, but then you have this scattering as well, and that happens 20 times. But what it really represents is we've done a magnificent job of trying to close that digital divide, the hardware and software divide, the technology divide. But now we're really talking about a content divide when suddenly we say some people are not going to have access to digital material because a public library or a university library or a school library are unable to purchase it, lease it on behalf of the public interest. And so, you know, I really liken that problem to some of the censorship battles that we fought in the US, and I'm guessing in other parts of the country. It was not just censoring controversial books, but how about the restrictions that come to the internet in some locations, or a notion of that there's a mandatory pay to read. And I don't know about you, but we have many neighborhoods where it would be impossible for children and students to purchase everything that they need for school, for work, or business, or life. And so at the end of the day, this really is a very important issue for us around access. And I think one of our jobs is absolutely to fight for access. That we talk about this quote in the US that public libraries and libraries in general are democracy's best kept promise. And so what is the definition of a library if we no longer have access to the content that we've had for years and years? If we take away 3/4 of the content that we have today, are we really still a library? Or is there a new term for what we are? So in the US, we don't talk about fighting for the future of public libraries. We're championing fighting for access. Now, I happen to think that that access is going to occur through libraries, but what we have to be thinking about is the rights of those who aren't even aware of what's happening around them. And then this is what's happening with the decline of actual books being purchased, 32% over a 20-year period of time. Really a shocking number in the number of items that have been added in public libraries. So we tried to understand this, and we put this graph together, not actually for ebooks. This graph was put together to help us understand the changing nature of formats, how they rise over time, how they plateau, and how they decline. And we really prepared this for our library board because we were trying to understand whether or not we should secure videotapes or DVDs. So this is about 7 or 8 years old. But if I could just walk you through this, the green line shows back in 2000, almost 100% of our AV circulation was in VHS tapes. And the blue line, so let's say this is 97% and 3% were DVDs. And then suddenly, as we went by year, you saw that as DVD popularity increased, VHS popularity decreased. And there was a crossover point for us in 2004, and I think many public libraries had this in the US. It was the first time during the holiday season that DVD players were under $100. And once that happened, it really just it accelerated that much further. and we got into this kind of a reversed scenario really in the course of a decade. Now, our staff back then, back 2006 or 7, was starting to predict, well, what happens with the download of e-movies? And I think they were a little bit aggressive in thinking how quickly it would happen. But of course, it is happening as we use various tools in our library to allow our customers to download movies as well as to check out DVDs. But what would this graph look like if we put print books and ebooks? Now, for us, about 15 million total circulation, about 800,000 are ebook downloads. Okay, what's going to happen over time as we move to 50-50 or 75-25, and what does that look like? Not in 2014, not in 2015, but over what period of time? Those are the things that we need to be thinking about right now. This is kind of funny because this book now is 18 years old from Bill Gates, and he has children and a foundation and is worried about health issues, but I actually like this quote because I think it's really true, and I think it's really the challenge for us as librarians is not necessarily thinking about this short-term change that we're experiencing, but what are those long-term changes and how do they impact our work? And so with that, I'm going to show you this video. It's not about libraries, it's about 4 minutes long, but it made me think differently about our business. And it's been an enjoyable video for most who've had a chance to see it. So let's see if I can make that work.
Visualization is right at the heart of my own work too. I teach global health. And I know having the data is not enough. I have to show it in ways people both enjoy and understand. Now, I'm going to try something I've never done before. Animating the data in real space, with a bit of technical assistance from the crew.
So, here we go. First, an axis for health. Life expectancy, from 25 years to 75 years. And down here, an axis for wealth. Income per person. $400, $4,000, and $40,000. So down here is poor and sick, and up here is rich and healthy. Now, I'm going to show you the world 200 years ago, in 1810. Here come all the countries. Europe brown, Asia red, Middle East green, Africa south of Sahara blue, and the Americas yellow. And the size of the country bubbles show the size of the population. And in 1810, it was pretty crowded down there, wasn't it? All countries were sick and poor. Life expectancy were below 40 in all countries. And only UK and the Netherlands were slightly better off, but not much. And now, why start the world? The Industrial Revolution makes countries in Europe and elsewhere move away from the rest. But the colonized countries in Asia and Africa, they are stuck down there. And eventually, the Western countries get healthier and healthier. And now we slow down to show the impact of the First World War and the Spanish flu epidemic. What a catastrophe! And now I speed up through the 1920s and the 1930s. And in spite of the Great Depression, Western countries forge on towards greater wealth and health. Japan and some others try to follow, but most countries stay down here. Now, after the tragedies of the Second World War, we stop a bit to look at the world in 1948. 1948 was a great year. The war was over, Sweden topped the medal table at the Winter Olympics, and I was born. But the differences between the countries of the world was wider than ever. United States was in the front, Japan was catching up. Brazil was way behind, Iran was getting a little richer from oil, but still had short lives. And the Asian giants, China, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh and Indonesia, they were still poor and sick down here. But look what is about to happen. Here we go again. In my lifetime, former colonies gained independence, and then finally they started to get healthier and healthier and healthier. And in the 1970s, then countries in Asia and Latin America started to catch up with the Western countries. They became the emerging economies. Some in Africa follows. Some Africans were stuck in civil war and others hit by HIV. And now we can see the world today in the most up-to-date statistics. Most people today live in the middle, but there are huge differences at the same time between the best of countries and the worst of countries. And there are also huge inequalities within countries. These bubbles show country averages, but I can split them. Take China, I can split it into provinces. There goes Shanghai. It has the same wealth and health as Italy today. And there is the poor inland province Guizhou. It is like Pakistan. And if I split it further, the rural parts are like Ghana in Africa.
And yet, despite the enormous disparities today, we have seen 200 years of remarkable progress. That huge historical gap between the West and the rest is now closing. We have become an entirely new converging world. And I see a clear trend into the future. With aid, trade, green technology and peace, it's fully possible that everyone can make it to the healthy, wealthy corner.
Well, what you just seen in the last few minutes is a story of 200 countries shown over 200 years and beyond. It involved plotting of 120,000 numbers. Pretty neat, huh?
Okay. So I don't have the benefit of the visualization for data. So this made me think about library services and the big bubbles of service that we have for libraries. And similar to what you saw in that video, for the Columbus Library, I tried to show bubbles of our largest service, or the largest bubbles, and the smaller services are some of the smaller bubbles. So right in the middle, you see really what we have been known for, Library of Our Youth. We've been about books, we've been about circulation. 15 million transactions have been in the center of really the work that we do. And so what would the axes be for thinking about library services and this change in scale of service? So I think up here I have years of education, and here I have income. And so 6 years of education versus 20 plus years, and 10,000 up to 100,000. So we'd say, well, here are low education, low income. We would understand that correlation, right? And up here we would say high education, high income. That makes sense to us as well. Then over here we have high education, low income, and I always say that's librarians up there, right? We all know that. And then over here we have low education and high income. Well, I think that's a lottery winner, right? I'm not sure who else that is. But really this made no sense to me in terms of being appropriate for libraries. So then I started thinking about the cost to provide each unit of service versus the quantity of experiences. So this might cost just a few pennies, up to $50, up to $1,000. Here it might be 100,000 transactions, 1 million, 10 million, or 20 million. So again, on this 2x2 chart, you see that we have, here are high cost, low volume services. Here are low cost, low volume services. High cost, high volume, and low cost, high volume. And if you actually plot the bubbles of at least our library, what you find is most are in this lower right-hand corner of low cost, high volume. So for us, book circulation, we think somewhere of around $3 each time we check out a book to someone. That's how much it costs. But you'll hear in a few minutes when we're doing something like Ready to Read, we're working with individuals one-on-one. It might be $50 for that transaction. And that's the real shift that's taking place, because most of our services historically have been in this lower right-hand column. But now start thinking about ebooks again, because really it does not take very much work after acquisition in our website to transact an ebook, or even to renew a book online. Of this 15 million items that we have for circulation, we think about 1/3 are actually renewals from our customers. Well, there's a primary circulation when someone comes in to check it out, but the secondary circulation, which is really a circulation of convenience, it really requires no additional work for us at all. We're actually now working on something in Columbus where you might do this as well. When a book is about to be overdue, you send someone an email, right, telling them it'll be due. Starting this year, we're going to send them an email that says, we've taken the courtesy of renewing that item for you to avoid overdue fines. And maybe the one is waiting for someone else. You're going to have to bring that back, but just bring it back when you'd like to. And we're going to continue to do that. And I think our customers are really going to like it a great deal. What we don't get an appreciation for, and this chart can't really help you visualize, is the difference in scale between 15 million circulation, which is this big blue bubble, and 20,000 times where we go out and speak to people in the community about preparing their children for kindergarten. So 20,000, I think there would be about, I think somewhere of around 18 to 25 would fit in here. You have to actually see 750 to understand the difference in scale. So we're about to see a massive change in the scale of resources that we've devoted to analog circulation. So what are those resources? The books that come in boxes, and someone unpacks them and we catalog them, and they go to they get stamped, and they move out to a delivery service, and someone takes them to the branch, someone puts them on the shelf. We heat, cool, dust, maintain shelving. If all of that goes away, how are we reutilizing and repurposing all of our resources for other work in a public library? And again, that's the Bill Gates quote. It's not about what's happening in the next 2 years, but what's happening in the next 10. That's what we need to be thinking. And I think increasingly, it's not going to be about cost and quantity. It's going to be about value and quantity. So where are we delivering the highest value? Even though it's lower volume, it's going to end up costing us more, but it's going to have to deliver very high value in the future. And that's really where I see the work of public libraries moving forward. What we're finding, and I'm going to talk about next, are some of the services that we provide that are not as impersonal as checking out a book. They are things like what we call ready to read, or teaching life skills to adults, or homework help centers, or even our summer reading program that we have in the U.S. That's really where we're going to move from those traditional library outputs to library outcomes. So this is the strategic plan of the Columbus Metropolitan Library. So 20 branches, 875 staff. This is what we do for our external customers. We have 3 areas, what we call Young Minds, how we encourage learning and growth to create a foundation for a successful life. My Library, how do we create the next generation library? We're building 7 new libraries right now, and remodeling and expanding 3 others right now. We're doing $120 million in capital construction. But how do we create the next generation library? Not a library that works for everyone, because the libraries of the past had policies and practices that were a lower common denominator, because it had to work for everyone. Because of social media and other services, people are looking for a very customized experience. So how do we have a library that works for me? That's where we're shooting for. And then lastly, it's really for those young minds who did not obtain the foundation for a successful life, how do we provide opportunities in life skills so that our entire community can help reach its potential? And we go one step further where we create some equations. And by the way, don't worry about writing this down. I'll certainly make this presentation available to you. But if these are our 3 areas of strategic focus, and we put a plus sign in here to create an equation, what are the investments that we make in all 3 areas to equate to the desired outcome that we're looking for? And time permits today that I only delve into young minds, so one strategy, and I'm going to go into 3 of those investments, what we call Ready to Read, our homework help centers, and our summer reading club. And the message here is really around why we are doing this, not the what. So in the US, or in the state of Ohio, every child at 5 years of age gets tested when they go into kindergarten, first year of school at age 5. They get tested for basic literacy awareness, and it's called a crawl test, KRAL, Kindergarten Readiness Assessment for Literacy. And in the city of Columbus, over the last 5 years, here is the percentage of children who are not passing that test. Almost 40% consistently over the last 5 years. These children have not even been to school yet, so that is not a problem of the schools. It's really a community challenge. And so I had several business leaders come to me and say, Pat, we don't understand this. If you proclaim that you're one of the best public libraries in the United States, how can we have statistics like this in our community? And what's your response to helping? That was really a very difficult conversation for me to have. As you move forward, what we see at the age of 5 persists at the age of 8 when children are in 3rd grade of grammar school or elementary school. Because at that time they're tested for reading proficiency, and this is the percentage of children who pass, about 60%. And so the 40% who were not passing at kindergarten, no surprise, are not passing at 3rd grade, because that early investment was not there. And that kindergarten readiness test is the alphabet, it's rhyming, it's letter sounds, print awareness. If we're at an at-risk neighborhood, in a low economic neighborhood, if we hand a child a book and they hold it upside down, you realize at age 4 or 5, they've never held a book. And imagine them competing with children who come from a too professional family. So then we take it even one step further, and it even gets more troubling for us in central Ohio and really in our country as well. So in our county, in 2004, we had 17,000 students in 9th grade. And by the time they were to graduate from high school, for us that's the years 9, 10, 11, and 12, we only graduate 12,300. 4,700 dropped out of school. And if we go one step further to those entering a public college or university, slightly more than 5,000 decided to go on to the university. And of those, 41% needed help with college-level math and English. So even though they showed up with a high school degree, and so you would say they're ready for college, they were unable to perform without this additional help. After 1 year in college, only 3,800 remained, and at the end, around 11 or 12% actually graduated. So, I don't know if you recall in the animated data, one of the countries that was near the top in terms of income and health was the US. Those statistics are really troubling for us today because every urban school system in our country is facing some of these very difficult educational challenges. And therein lies what we believe is the opportunity for our public library and for many public libraries in the U.S. when we no longer have to devote our resources to checking out analog materials. And the work that we do around pre-kindergarten and third grade, our outcomes are trying to influence community trajectories. So when I shared with you that 40% of the children were not ready for kindergarten, we're going to try and measure our success as a library system to see if we've improved kindergarten readiness scores in the community by the work that we're doing. We're going to see if we can help third grade children be more proficient in the third grade reading tests so that they don't fail. And by the way, this year in Ohio, this is some of the drastic measures that are being taken. So for the first time, we have a new state law that if a child does not pass the third grade proficiency test for reading, regardless of how well they do in any other subject, they must repeat third grade. We are projecting 1,900 children repeating third grade starting next fall. So we're a little bit in a crisis mode right now, and many people looking toward our public library to see not only what we can do for third grade reading, but ultimately how do we help more children pass high school and move on to college. So what are some of our responses? We have a ready-to-read program. It's not based in the library at all. It's all based in the community. We have 6 teams of 2 staff who go out to at-risk neighborhoods, and wherever we find disadvantaged individuals, parents with young children, it might be a social service agency, it might be a doctor's office, a free store, a church, a laundromat. Wherever we find people in need, we are working with these parents to help them understand their role in preparing their children for kindergarten. And one of the most humbling things for me is some of the programs that we've done in the community when we bring in some young parents, obviously poor, obviously not well educated, and our staff is in the front of the room conducting a story time with an oversized book. You see their faces start to light up, and you realize they're 18 or 19 years old and they've never experienced a story time themselves. How in the world could we expect them to transfer that skill to their own children if they don't have it? And if we don't step in to help break that cycle of low education, of poverty, of an at-risk behaviors, then I think we're missing our greatest opportunity. So we were actually the first agency in town. We took our county and we plotted all of the scores for some of the schools for kindergarten readiness. The schools hadn't even done this, and we did. And we found out that some of the schools had 70 and 80% of the children arriving for school without basic knowledge of the alphabet. And so we were able to draw circles around congregated red zones, and that's really where our efforts began. So I can tell you over a 3-year period, with the help of some corporate partners, we handed out almost 26,000 book kits to parents. So they received three board books, they received sponge letters to practice the alphabet during bath time, some things for parents to help them understand how to work with their children to prepare them for kindergarten. And what was most, for me it was surprising, and maybe it was some of my own biases coming out, is realizing, maybe you get a sense that people who are at risk don't care as much about their children. Well, let me tell you, they care deeply, and they understand that one of their chief goals is to try to give their children a better life. And so they're very receptive to the services that we provide. And our work is trying to see how we improve those kindergarten readiness scores over time. We've also done the same with homework help centers. I'm sure you help some children who come into your libraries who need assistance with homework help. But for us, this is now one of the main things that we do. So if you can imagine a space half the size of this room, from roughly 3 o'clock until 7:30 each day in each of our locations, we have textbooks from all the area schools. We have computers only available to school children. We have supplies, and we have 1 or 2 staff who coordinate community volunteers who come in to help kids with their homework. And the kids scan their card, and they tell us the subject matter that they need help with. Now we're starting to feed that data back to the schools to develop a really strong partnership with the schools so that they understand what children are asking help for. And here's another one of those maps. So this is 4 years, the red dots showing the home locations of children who have come in to one of our locations to actually get assistance from homework help. And really the map is just to let you know that it's county-wide and amazingly popular. You can see it just about 250,000 visits our first 4 years, and now we're averaging over 100,000 visits for each school year. We are on a 9-month school year. You have year-round school, correct, here in New Zealand? And you have, what, about 6 weeks off, Christmas into January? Okay, so we're still in this agrarian society mindset in the U.S. So we have off June, July, and August. And there's a wonderful book that perhaps some of you have read by Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers, where he tracked the performance of children from low income, medium income, and high income. And what he found was that, for the most part, during the 9 months of school in the U.S., children from all 3 groups perform at the same level. And then the summer comes, and children in poverty have very few options over the next 3 months. While children from high-income families go to space camp, science camp, foreign language tutor, mom and dad take them to Europe at the end of the summer. They essentially have 3 more months of learning over the course of each 12 years. 36 months, 3 years of additional education. And so those children consistently outperform lower income children. And so we're realizing that one of the most important things we can do is to provide the lower income children with greater opportunities during the summertime. So in Columbus, we have almost 90,000 children enrolled in a summer reading program, coming in with incentives from area businesses that actually give children prizes, ice cream and that sort of thing if they're reading. But that's just the experience. What we're really trying to do now is we're working with The Ohio State University to actually try to change that program and tailor it to make sure that we're actually getting better results from the children. So the children that start in June, if they participate over the course of 3 months, are we able to measure in a statistically valid way that our program is actually having an impact? Because again, we'd like to say that our 3rd grade reading scores are going to go up over time because of the investments that we've made over the summer reading program. At the end, you get to this question of what's going to drive library design for the future. I told you that here we are spending $120 million in Columbus to build 7 new libraries, remodel 3. And it's the first time in almost 28 or 29 years of working in libraries, I'm not sure how many books should go in this new library, right? You were all feeling that as well? Well, I came across a great quote from the Knight Foundation where they said that the libraries of the past were built for collections, but the libraries of the future are built for connections. And that connection is really around the communities, and it's really around our own people. For years and years, we've been in a knowledge business in libraries, and yet our people have been used for the transaction business. As we move to self-checkout, as we move to automated computer reservations, as we move to ebook downloads, what we find is that we can use our people for transformational opportunities, not just transactional opportunities. Those are going to be lower volume and higher value, and ultimately addressing some of the community outcomes that are relevant in your community. I'm giving you an example today of what's important in Columbus. I'm not suggesting at all that you have the same challenges as our community, but what are your community challenges and how do you dig into them? You know, for years we've prepared things like book lists and other kinds of library material, but have we ever featured the staff members' pictures who actually do the work? When we made this shift in Columbus and we produced glossy materials like this and we took them out into the branches or into schools, we found that the kids brought them into the library branches and were asking staff for their autograph, right? They thought the staff were rock stars because they didn't know anyone in their life who was on a glossy piece of paper. So if you're doing a story time, if you're preparing a book list, if you're offering a program for adults, why don't we offer the name of our person, of the staff member who created it? How do we create that connection to individuals? And as I get near the end here, I'm just going to put a plug in for this because this is something that I'm really proud of in Columbus, and it starts with something that bothered me for years. Don't worry about the print that's on here. This is just a visual to give you the context. You've all seen these. These are the organization charts that we're most familiar with. You typically have the CEO and a board of trustees, and then you have a line, and you have the senior management team, and all of this is going on. And I've never liked these. I've never liked these because in many respects, they suggest that you're serving the people up here. It also is very slow to work in this hierarchy because when this person over here needs to talk to this person over here, what happens? I'm going to go up here and I'd like to talk to this person over here. Okay, let me go over here and talk to this person over here. Okay, let me check. I'll go talk to this person over here. Yeah, you can do it. So now we go through this chart and it takes forever. And the world moves so much faster today. And we can't live in that kind of hierarchy. So this is what we put together in Columbus as a way to help change our thinking about our organization chart and how we work. So we put our customers in the middle. And I started out by showing you a chart that showed some of the businesses and the international companies. The nice thing about Columbus, we're large enough to have international companies. We're small enough that I can call up the CEO and say, I'd like to talk to you about some things around the library. And they say, sure, come on in. So I went to talk to one of the major retail business CEOs in Columbus, and I said, we've talked about our users being customers for years as opposed to patrons, but I really want to take our customer service to the next level. And he said, all right, I'll help you think about that, come on in. And he asked me this really profound question. He said, what do you know about your customers who use your web and your customers who walk in, he said your stores, but our library branches? And I said, and I don't know about you, but I said, I don't know very much at all. Because you can walk into the library and not use the web. You can use the web and not walk into the library. Or you can be in the library and not use the web. And he said, well, when we started looking at the data, it was exactly opposite of what we thought. Because the people who use the website for our store, on average, made 3 times as many visits to a store as those who only use the store. How do we create that relationship seamless between the web experience and the virtual experience and the walk-in experience? So in Columbus, we put all of those points of customer contact under a new position called our Chief Customer Experience Officer. And we're trying to understand not only the locations and what happens in the building, we're trying to link that to what happens in our website, to our marketing and messaging, and also to our collection management. We add 400,000 new items a year to our collection. How do we make sure that someone is understanding all of those points of relevancy and contact? That's what this is all about. And it also encouraging all of us, myself as Chief Executive Officer, our Chief Financial Officer, all of our teams, to say our real bullseye, what's at the heart? What are we trying to hug? It's really our customer. How are we trying to make a difference as quickly as we possibly can? So these 3 words are over the front door of our main library, open to all. And they're very important words. When I was brand new a decade ago, I had 2 women who were in their 80s of color who came up to me and said, really grabbed my arm and said, we want you to understand that when we were little girls in Columbus, because of those 3 words, this is one of the few buildings that we were welcome in Columbus, no questions asked. And never forget that, and I never have. But we've talked about this with our staff. If we turn open to all into all things to all people, we're really going to be below average at a lot of things. So as I leave you this morning, what I encourage you to think about is what's important in your community. What are you going to do that's going to rise above the noise? What are you going to be great at? What are people going to know you for? So that it's not just a library for today, it's really a library for all time. Thank you very much.
And not working in a public library, this is very interesting for me, but I'm thinking particularly with some of these issues about literacy and learning for the kids in your community. Have you set yourself, or do you have any sense of the time frame in which you actually think, well, either it's working or it's not, because at some point you have to decide whether sending out your 6 teams of 2 is doing the job or not doing the job. So how are you trying to work through those issues?
You know, the great question, and I can tell you is at the heart of one of our challenges, because we have a little bit of a collision in a philosophy of libraries and public libraries that is about maintaining confidentiality versus how do we use aggregate data to understand how well we're performing. So those 2 are a little bit at odds. And so I don't think, and maybe you're better in New Zealand than we are, but I don't think in the US we've done a very good job of using information and data to help us make programming and policy and strategic decisions. But I think you're exactly right, and this is what the community is saying to us as well. We're now actually spending $1 million a year on this program for kindergarten readiness. And it's even shocking to our staff when they hear me say, look, if after the period of time when these toddlers, infants and toddlers move into kindergarten, if we're not making a difference in these trajectories, we have to try something radically different because the need is still there. But it's not short term. I mean, we're really seeing a strong focus on age 0 to about age 8 in 3rd grade as the foundational point to give us success throughout. So it's a longer term investment, but if we're into this 3, 4, 5 years and we're not seeing the results, we're going to have to pull the plug and do something very different. And I think you would probably agree, librarians are not good at that. I mean, we get passion around the program and we say, well, it has to be good because it feels good to us and the parents are receptive to the service. That's the difference of the work that we did in the past to the work we're doing in the future. It has to be results oriented, has to be value laden in order for it to matter. And I'll give you another, maybe this is something very unique to U.S. public libraries, and certainly not all U.S. public libraries have this. Part of our support, about 80% of our support, 75%, comes from our ability to go directly to the voters during major elections and ask them for library funding. So the last time, I've seen some smiles like, ooh, I'd like that, right? So the last time we did this was in 2010, and we went to that entire area that was colored yellow was our service area, And so people go in and actually vote to decide if they will levy a tax on their property, an increase in tax for better library services. And the last time we had to go was 2010. And that, as you may recall, was sort of the depths of the recession. And we were pretty nervous because our levy was expiring. And we went back and asked for a substantial increase in funding because we were losing some money from our state. And it passed by more than 2-1. Out of the entire county, there were only 2 precincts that voted against it. We passed everywhere else, and it's a permanent tax levy that now provides $50 million a year for the Columbus Metropolitan Library, which is how we're doing some of our building programs and the rest. But so I think the point is, if we're not responsive over time, there's a real accountability directly to the voters that we will be held accountable for.
How did you arrive at those particular areas of focus, and to what extent did you actually have to work with your institutional partners or your city partners to arrive at that as the means by which you would be able to demonstrate value to the community?
Yeah. You know what I think I don't have an appreciation for in New Zealand is how well your schools are performing. But this is a major issue in the U.S. So there's a lot of conversation around the failure of our public schools and the underperformance of children in the schools. And so this is an ongoing community conversation. And I had a mentor early on in my career who said, when you get invited to a community meeting and you walk in and you say library, 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 then you don't get invited to the second meeting. But if you walk in and you listen to what the community issues are and you say, here's how the library can help, what happens is you weave yourself into the fabric of the community, and then you are a part of those conversations and you're viewed as a partner who can provide some relief, some results, some resources to address the community issues. So the community was already talking about the low performance of children going into kindergarten. Our legislature was passing a new law that said we are not going to continue to move children on to 4th and 5th grade when they don't know how to read in 3rd grade. The idea being is from 0 to age 8 you learn to read. After age 8, you read to learn. So if you don't have that basic skill, we're just moving them along and they're going to be a dropout statistic. So that conversation was already going on, and so we just inserted ourselves into those community meetings. I also heard a line that I liked that said, you know, pay attention to those community meetings, because if you're not at the table, oftentimes you're on the menu. When they're carving up the tax dollars, right?
I'm interested in, it's not directly related to what you're talking about, but you said about children who are going to be mandated to stay behind.
Yeah.
That really worries me in terms of social outcomes and how that affects those children, because I've been involved in the, as a parent in the systems both here and in Australia, and I know in Australia they tend to hold kids back. In New Zealand, it's a bit more mixed, and kids get socially advanced even though they might not be academically, you know, we have a lot more mixed classes that let kids not know so much they're being held back. And I just wonder what you see as the social implications of holding back 1,900 kids.
I think it's huge.
People that aren't their peers.
I think it's huge. I don't think we understand it. I think at first it was an absolute overreach in terms of a solution. I had sort of a non-traditional educator say to me, so we're going to punish children for what adults haven't figured out, right? Yeah. Makes us think about that. So I was really concerned, and I'm still concerned about that. But I think the one thing that it has done in our community, it has really raised the awareness of the importance of reading. So I think we have the other social ills in grades 9, 10, and 11. When those children, where school is no longer relevant, they're acting out before they're dropping out. So it's a matter of where are we going to deal with those social ills. We're still going to deal with them. My hope is that we can cut that number in half over the next reasonable amount of time, and then cut it in half again and just keep working on it. So I think we're going into the great unknown, and we will have some unintended consequences that we'll have to deal with. But I must say, I'm a little bit of a convert in terms of now seeing the emphasis on reading and its importance to a life skill. You know, in the US, it's one of the common characteristics of our prison population is they're illiterate. If you don't have that skill, you're trying to act out in other ways to try to survive, and mostly they're not positive ways. So, long-winded answer, I think it remains to be seen. I think it's going to be a challenge for us. But I think there's a desperation right now because we can't move 1,900 children forward either who don't have that skill set. So, good question, thank you. Yes?
What part does technology play in some of your programs, if at all, and, you know, perhaps in the school system as well? I know, I don't really know much about the New Zealand situation, we haven't got young children, but I know there are some schools where it's compulsory to have, you know, the children to have iPads and so on. Are you using technology in your programs?
So I didn't bring it with me, but it's in my luggage. I'm reading on the way here the most successful children in the world and how they got that way. And it is really case study on about 5 or 6 different countries, including the US and including some high-performing nations. I think Finland, Poland, and I'm trying to remember the third. But what is amazing is as I'm reading this book, is it talks about, Korea, sorry, is the other, South Korea. Is the very little correlation between technology and student performance. So this is a big issue in the US. The wealthy school districts are trying to have smart boards and iPads for every child, and yet when it's coming down to actual student performance, it's very hard to draw that link. Now, we think that in libraries, obviously, I don't know how we do our job today without robust technology. All of the buildings that we're building, and I talked about libraries for connections, all of our buildings are really going to be complete glass facades. Now you can kind of tell in this building about what era it was built for. It was to house collections, to help keep light out of the building, right? And well, because light was bad for collections. And yet here we are, we all feel like mushrooms today, right? Am I offending you, Jenny? I've got a reimbursement that I need from her, so I had to be careful. So all of our libraries that we're building now, when they occupy a streetscape, they're going to be complete glass, floor-to-ceiling glass. We want people to walk by, drive by, ride their bicycle by, and we want them to be able to see in not only the technology, which will be, for us, very prevalent, but we also want them to see people, because in the US we found that low class, middle class, upper class, you use a library based on a habit. Did someone take you to a library when you were a child? Did you develop it in school? And so one of the things we have is we have many people who don't think that a library is a place for them. All of our buildings are going to be so transparent that they'll walk by and they'll say, well, gosh, there's my neighbor and he's not very smart. If he's there, then maybe I can be there as well. But that is to highlight technology. So we're going to do a lot of educational games, a lot of things to, we're not a school. At the end of the day, we still are a library. But how do we create those dynamic experiences that can evolve and change over time and inspire children to move forward? That's what we'll try to do.